Summer of Love, it's at the museum.
Hey, which button you had to push here?
There you go.
Hello.
Hello. Can you hear me?
I'll call to order the October 19th, 2017 meeting of the Santa Barbara County Air Pollution Control District Board of Directors. Will the clerk please call roll?
Director Richardson?
Here.
Williams?
Here.
Wolf?
Here.
Hartman?
Here.
Adam?
Here.
Lavanino?
Here.
Sierra?
Here.
Clark?
Here.
Bennett?
Here.
Lizalde? Snyder?
Here.
Patino? And Chair Mosby.
Present. At this time, please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Ready, begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The first item of business is the approval of the minutes for September 7th, 2017 meeting. Any discussion? Motion?
Move approval.
Second.
You still want your roll call vote?
Mr. Chair, at the moment we don't have anybody participating remotely. We may be joined by a board member later in the meeting, but you could do this one by voice vote if you want.
Okay, all in favor?
Wait,
Any opposed?
You know what? I do have a correction. Sorry. I actually
One correction.
I wasn't at the meeting on September 7th. And it says I was here, so I'm going to, I also want to abstain on the minutes.
All right, so one correction. You want to make your motion again with the corrected?
Yeah, move approval as corrected.
And the second, third?
Second.
Okay. All right, so once again, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? And one abstain. The next item is the approval of administrative items.
Wait, I hate to go back to this, but I do think Janet might want to look back at our calendar because I'm pretty sure you were there. I distinctly remember conversations that you were a part of. Yeah.
We can check the tape.
You might be thinking of the last we had a special.
This was a limited agenda for my contract specifically.
I want you to get credit. You know, you.
All right, so you want to go back and delete that one and re-amend the original? Okay.
So move as printed. And I'll second.
The second is printed, so all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstain? All right, I'll carry back on to the first item of business. The next item is the approval of administrative items. Does any board member wish to pull any of these items?
Item A11, please.
Item A11. Read this into the record.
Item A11 is to consider the following actions. This is approve and authorize the chair to execute an agreement for software and special services with Tyler Technologies, Inc., and B, delegate authority to the Air Pollution Control Officer to extend the term of the maintenance support agreement for 3 years on same terms and conditions.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with the initial contract, but I think we should be able, since this is a first time contract, I think we should be able to have come back to the board and get reauthorization after this is up and make sure that we're happy with the service and everything.
What do you need to take such direction?
I have a comment. We use Tyler Technologies for our software for our city. They've proven to be a very effective and cooperative corporation.
Well, that may be, but I'm just thinking that since this is a first-time thing, I think it should be a policy that before we get comfortable with somebody and it's going along, then it comes back to the board for approval. It can be an A item, but if anybody has a problem with it, you know, it's just a bad precedent for other contracts.
Are you thinking this is a one-time fee of the $97,000, and then the subsequent following years we use the service, it's a $10,000 annual fee, and it would be part of our budget. Are you thinking that the actual contract would be brought back to your board
Right.
on an annual basis?
Well, for
the
renewal.
maintenance agreement?
For renewal.
It's a maintenance agreement.
Oh, it's a,
Yeah, it's the purchase of the software is the initial, and then it's a maintenance agreement thereafter of $10,000 a year. And we could bring that back as an admin item if you'd like.
I think it should come back. Yeah.
Chair, Buellton has Tyler Hart software too, and I know that APCD staff did an extensive survey search for new software. I think when you get new software, it takes a while to work all the kinks out, and with an investment like that, I think it's really important that we do give them a term period to help with training and any problems that come up. So I think 3 years is that seems very fair to make sure that the software is working properly.
Anything else? I think you definitely, if you had an issue, you'd definitely be bringing it back anyways to let us know that you oops. And I think that's what Supervisor Adam is mentioning is if there's oopses there, no need to keep funding the oopses.
Right. So I guess it's just depending on the board's comfort level with bringing it back after the 3 years, which is included currently in the staff report. We did do a thorough evaluation of all available software that's on the market, and after talking with the city staff who has been utilizing this and seeing how it's used also in the neighboring county, San Luis Obispo has some jurisdictions as well, and one of the really strong aspects of this software is the user group that's being formed by all of the city and county jurisdictions, so it provides us with additional ongoing local support on top of what's included in our agreement.
Okay, I'm doing this on a policy type of a basis here that, you know, because there's likely to be future modifications in the contract, there almost always is. I would like to see it again and have an opportunity to say, you know, if the price doubles or something, instead of just giving you carte blanche to just go do it, not that I don't trust you, but, you know, I think it's just a bad policy to have automatic renewals or authorized contract renewals or extensions, and that's the basis that I oppose it. I'm not saying that I don't think you're going to do a good job or even that they're not going to do a good job. I just think that it keeps everybody on their toes better if they know that the contract has to come back to the board and it's just not automatic.
Mr. Chair, just for the record and a clarification, not really on your point, Mr. Adam, it's 3 one-year extensions of the maintenance agreement. So bring it back or not, it would be extended for 1 year each time. Thank you.
But if it's, you know, that doesn't solve my problem. If it's pre-authorized, you know, they can just double the price, and then, you know, if it's in the budget or you know, the APCO can make it work, then maybe we just go do things instead of bringing it back. And if they know that you have to bring it back to us, it gives you better leverage to negotiate a better deal with them.
I have no position in this, but I just note for the record, the contract has a contract price for the maintenance agreement, and it cannot be increased. If it was increased, it would be outside the delegation of authority to your executive officer. But if you want that to come back, that's entirely up to the board.
Yeah, I don't see what
they've negotiated a 3-year deal, is what they've done.
Yeah, but this also. Yeah. I understood this to be extendable beyond that 3-year period.
No.
No?
Not on us.
Okay.
We would need to come back to your board for approval.
Okay.
You good?
Let it be said, just because they're Texans, we still like them.
You mean we won't hold it against them? Okay.
All right, so let's bring back the other items other than A11 to vote on first? You want them separate, or can we do it all together? Separate?
If that's what Mr. Adams requested.
Would you? Okay. Let's bring everything but A11 back. At public comment on any of, on everything but A11. So first and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So bring back A11. First and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? One opposed. Questioners, nothing wrong. The next item is public comment. Now is the time for members of the public to speak on items that are not on the agenda. Any slips?
I have no speaker slips.
Okay. The next item is the director's report.
All right, thank you.
Ms. Director.
Good afternoon. I have 5 brief items to report on today. First off, I wanted to give a snapshot of our local air quality conditions. On the ozone front, May through October is our traditional ozone season here in Santa Barbara County. And as you're aware, with all of the recent action with our attainment planning, we are non-attainment transitional. And this status will likely continue until we have 0 to very few exceedances of the state ozone standard. So far this year, we have only had 1 day that we exceeded the standard, and that was on September 2nd. We exceeded the standard at both the Los Flores Canyon and the Lompoc HS&P station, and this was during very hot, stagnant meteorological conditions. So we still have a few more weeks in October. What I've been hearing on the news is even this weekend, it's getting warm. So who knows if we will see any other additional exceedances to the ozone standard. But fortunate to date, this year anyway, we only have had 1. On the particulate matter front, it's a little different. We are non-attainment for the state PM10 standard. So far in 2017, we exceeded the standard 35 times. Most typically during non-wildfire conditions, we see these exceedances at 2 of our stations, at Vandenberg and the Santa Maria station. But we have also seen with all the wildfires that have happened here in our county as well as statewide that the entire monitoring network has been impacted by the high levels of PM and exceeded the state standard, most recently with the fires up in Northern California. So I just wanted to also provide a reminder that we do include all of the current daily air quality conditions on our website at ourair.org, and we also post on our Twitter feed during the higher than normal air quality conditions. The second item relates to our ozone plan and the recent actions of your board to approve the new rule implementation schedule for ozone measures. We have one rule, Rule 360 for boilers, water heaters, and process heaters that are small in size that we're developing a proposal for your board's consideration. We will be holding a public workshop on November 1st at 3 p.m. at the APCD's office. And this is a proposed point-of-sale regulation that allows the district to achieve NOx emission reductions without forcing any immediate replacement of existing units. So following the public workshop, we'll bring this rule to our Community Advisory Council. That's dated for their December meeting, and if all goes as planned, it will be brought back to your board at the March meeting in 2018. The third item relates to the state's oil and gas regulations for greenhouse gas emissions. Our engineering division is currently working with the California Air Resources Board to implement this regulation here in our county. The rule became effective in October of this year, and the implementation will start in January of 2018. It will have additional regulations as time progresses with full implementation in 2019 and a little bit beyond that. We are very fortunate in Santa Barbara County compared to other air districts throughout the state, most of the requirements that are outlined in the state's oil and gas regulations are already incorporated into the air district rules. There are a few things as it relates to the La Galita natural gas storage facility of SoCal Gas that will be a new addition, and there are some other monitoring requirements. So in preparation for implementation of this rule, we're developing frequently asked questions that we can use in-house for our staff. They're going out and doing the inspections and assuring compliance of the regulation. We're also hosting public meetings in November. We have 2 public meetings set. One in Santa Maria on November 7th at 9:30 in the morning, a second meeting in Santa Barbara on November 14th. And the goal of these meetings is to meet with the oil and gas operators as well as any other interested parties to walk through the new requirements and help all parties understand how they will need to meet compliance and implement those regulations here within Santa Barbara. All right. The next item, I wanted to give you a brief update on our greenhouse gas mitigation efforts. This is something that we brought to your board in June. We held 2 public workshops in our county in September. We held one at the Santa Barbara City College, or City Library, on September 20th, and then the second was on the 21st up in Santa Maria. From my experience, this was the first time we intentionally held 2 to reach different audiences, and it was quite successful. We had a total of 45 individuals attend. We totally hit our target audience. We had the sources that are going through CEQA review right now with the oil and gas proposals that will be brought before the county for consideration. They were in attendance. Government representatives were in attendance, as well as nonprofit organizations. It was a very nice forum where we broke it up into different issue tables with all the various mitigation measures that are being considered, and we had a nice flow of feedback on what we outlined as potential local mitigations, and as well as trying to solicit ideas that we had not yet considered. We provided a presentation at the request of the Santa Barbara County Planning Commission on September 27th on the local mitigation measure that we feel is worth consideration. And we're in the process now of compiling all of that data, putting it onto our website for utilization at both the local government agency level as well as any project proponent that's going through a CEQA review and evaluation. All right, the last item relates to wood smoke reduction program. California Air Resources Board has confirmed it will be distributing the $5 million to air districts to implement a wood smoke reduction program. They, of course, came up with their own guidelines on how this will need to be implemented. In general, districts need to make a large effort to target low-income individuals with the goal of 75% of the money being distributed statewide to those communities. Overall, participating in this program would allow the Santa Barbara Air District to expand our program. We're still working with CAPCOA and the Air Resources Board. It's a fight for the funds, basically. Everyone's trying to get out there and get as much money as they possibly can for their local community. Next week, I'll be up in Monterey. CAPCOA has their fall conference, and that's where we're supposed to be resolving how much money we can get. The range of money would likely go anywhere between $50,000 to $250,000 for Santa Barbara County. Those are the 2 proposals on the table. I'm hopeful that we can get at least $100,000 for your board's consideration, because we will have to do targeted outreach that's different than the program we have now and implementation of the guidelines. Regardless, when we get the funding that's available to us, that program will be brought back to your board for consideration. And that concludes my director's report.
Questions are lining up.
One quick question. You mentioned PM standards were exceeded at Vandenberg and Santa Maria. Do you know the source? Could that be missile launching?
No. Most recently, it's been based on the wildfires. Oh. The Vandenberg station is an interesting station based on its proximity to the ocean. And at times you see higher levels there, and it could be the sea salt actually that's being blown in the area. Yeah, so it's something that we need to do further evaluation as far as speciation of the data as it comes in. But it's very clear with wildfires in particular, it doesn't just happen at Vandenberg, it happens across the entire network.
You said except for wildfires when you mentioned Vandenberg and stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Any others? Very good, thank you. The next item is discussion item 1. Clerk, read it to the record.
Item number 1 is to receive a presentation on the Santa Barbara County's emission inventory.
All right, each year, the Air District compiles an annual emissions inventory for sources that are located throughout the county region. This information is combined with data that's provided for area-wide sources and mobile sources from the California Air Resources Board. Similarly to how we presented on our air monitoring efforts at the most recent meeting, I thought it would be helpful for you to receive a presentation on the emissions inventory. Both the ambient air quality monitoring data as well as the emissions inventory data is very useful for us. It's critical information that we use as we move forward in our long-term planning to achieve attainment of both the state and the federal standards. Today, 2 staff from our Technology and Environmental Assessment Division will be presenting for the first time to the Air Pollution Control District. T Division is responsible for compiling, calculating, and reporting the emission inventory and submitting those to both the Air Resources Board and the EPA. I will now hand the baton over to our team to provide the presentation. Tim Mitro, an air quality engineer who has been at the district for 3 years, and Alex Economu, an air quality specialist. And Alex, you've been here for 1 year, a little bit over.
All right. Thank you very much, Aaron.
You guys, one quick question?
Well, since this is your first presentation that you've ever given to the board, we have a series of 10 objections and questions that Supervisor Adams will be providing. Just to give you some preparation.
Yeah, we'll let you get started, though, before we interrupt.
All right, sounds good. All right, so good afternoon, everyone. Today we're going to give you a brief presentation regarding the emission inventory. More specifically, we'll review how we get our inventory data, the preliminary results of the 2016 inventory, and then discuss some of the recent noteworthy topics in the inventory world. So to begin with, there are many types of emission inventories that can be created. First, there are criteria pollutants and their precursors. These are the pollutants that can cause exceedances of the health-based ambient air quality standards set by the California Air Resources Board and the US EPA. Our presentation today is focused on these criteria pollutants, which includes reactive organic compounds and nitrogen oxides, and particulate matter emissions such as PM10 and PM2.5. For reference, the district also has an inventory for toxic air pollutants. There are around 200 identified toxic pollutants such as benzene, hexane, formaldehyde, and diesel particulate matter, to name a few. And we can also estimate greenhouse gas emissions for stationary sources, but typically we defer to the California Air Resources Board for these GHG calculations. So to begin with, we'll give you an overview of how these criteria pollutant emissions come from and how they're calculated. I'll be handing the presentation over to Alex.
Hi, good afternoon. As Tim mentioned, my name is Alex Economu, and I'm an air quality specialist here at the APCD. In my role at the district, I specifically work on compiling the emissions inventory that we're here today presenting on. Our emission inventory includes emissions from Santa Barbara County, as well as the state tidelands and the outer continental shelf. Within our jurisdiction, there are several types of emission sources that the district is responsible for inventorying. Stationary sources are facilities that are subject to district permitting requirements and can typically be pinpointed on a map. They can have a single emitting device or multiple devices associated with them and range in size from an individual generator at a commercial facility to large industrial processes at oil and gas production fields. Other examples include auto body shops, landfills, and dry cleaners. Emissions from stationary sources are calculated by the district. Area-wide sources, on the other hand, are small, geographically dispersed processes that are not subject to district permitting requirements. Individually, the emissions from each process are small, but collectively can add up to significant amounts of pollution. Area-wide sources range from architectural paints to residential space heaters, and emissions are estimated jointly by the California Air Resources Board, or CARB, as well as the district. Emissions from mobile sources also represent a significant portion of Santa Barbara's emission inventory and can be broken down into on-road vehicles and off-road sources. On-road vehicles consist of passenger cars, trucks, and buses, and off-road sources include boats, trains, airplanes, and off-road equipment. Emission estimates from on-road vehicles and off-road sources are estimated by CARB. We estimate emissions from stationary sources based on annual report throughput data that facilities submit to the district each year. Additionally, annual reports are used as a compliance tool to ensure that facilities are not exceeding their annual throughput limits. On this slide is an example of what a blank annual report looks like for gas stations. For some emission types, we've made it easier for facilities to report annual emission data by providing them with report templates. For more complex facilities that don't have report templates, the facilities submit throughput information to us in a format that fulfills their permits reporting requirements. Emissions are then calculated by multiplying annual throughputs, such as volume of fuel or tonnage of product, by an emission factor. An emission factor is a representative value that relates the quantity of a pollutant to the release of that pollutant. In the example of the gas station, the source reports the annual amount of gallons of gasoline that they dispensed, which we then multiply by an emission factor to calculate their annual emissions. The emission factor that gets used reflects the best available emission data and assumptions and is usually determined based on one of three methods. Either emission calculations that are done by our engineering division. It can also be calculated based on actual source test data from equipment at one of our permitted stationary sources, or it can be taken from published methodologies from other agencies, such as CARB, the EPA, or other districts. After all the annual reporting data is compiled and an emission inventory for the year is calculated and reviewed, we submit the data to CARB, who then takes it and reviews it and submits it to the US EPA. Now I'll turn the presentation back to Tim, who will go over our emission inventory in some more detail.
All right. So once all the data is compiled by the California Air Resources Board, we can generate reports that will show us the entire Santa Barbara County planning inventory. The data presented today represents the preliminary 2016 inventory numbers, and these numbers do not include any natural emissions. We'll begin with looking at reactive organic compounds. ROC emissions for the year 2016 were estimated to be around 23.3 tons per day, as shown in the highlighted cell on the left. When looking at the pie chart on the right, you can see that the ROC emissions are coming from a variety of sources. Stationary sources make up around 25% of the inventory, area sources make up around 38%, and mobile sources of pollution make up the remainder of the ROC inventory. Moving on to the next pollutant, NOx emissions were estimated to be around 71.6 tons per day. Marine vessels that are traveling through the Santa Barbara Channel are still the largest contributor to the NOx inventory, and these emissions are calculated using a model developed by the California Air Resources Board. On-road vehicles and off-road sources are also large contributors, whereas the stationary sources within the district are already well controlled, such that they represent a fraction of the remaining NOx inventory. Together, ROC and NOx are the two precursor pollutants that form ozone, and Santa Barbara County is currently designated as non-attainment transitional for the state ozone standard. Now we're going to look at particulate matter emissions. Oh, it's for me, okay.
Yeah. Hang on just a second. Okay.
Still good. Okay. So particulate matter is a mixture of solid and liquid droplets in the air that can be released directly from a specific source or formed by chemical reactions in the atmosphere. PM10 emissions are estimated to be around 13.4 tons per day, and for this chart we decided to break up the area-wide sources into the main subcategories to more clearly show you where they're coming from. The first subcategory is the area source combustion emissions, as shown on the right-hand side. This category mainly consists of residential fireplaces and wood stoves, and they represent around 9% of the total PM10 inventory. Next, we have road dust, and these are the emissions from when a vehicle drives on either a paved or unpaved road, which can stir up a lot of dust with their wheels. This category is only comprised of the emissions that are created between the tires and the roads themselves. Then we have construction and demolition emissions, and these involve the emissions from grading the soil and excavating the land. And finally, we have farming operations, as farmers typically have to plow and till their fields, and that can cause particulate matter to be emitted. So as you can see, PM10 can come from a variety of sources, and Santa Barbara County is designated as non-attainment for the state PM10 standard. We also want to look at PM2.5 emissions, since these are the very fine particles that can penetrate deeper into the lungs and cause more severe health problems as compared to the larger PM10 particles. So PM2.5 emissions are estimated to be around 4 tons per day. When you compare this chart to the previously shown PM10 chart, you can see that area-wide sources make up a smaller percentage of the PM2.5 inventory, and this is mainly because a lot of the processes on the right-hand side, they're creating fugitive dust that typically has larger size particles rather than the superfine PM2.5. But overall, PM2.5 can come from a variety of sources, and Santa Barbara County attains the PM2.5 ambient air quality standards.
All right, thanks, Tim. Now that you've taken a peek into the district's emission inventory, I'm going to dive into a little bit what it's used for. The emission inventory helps the district to identify air pollution problems, which help us formulate plans to achieve clean and healthy air. An example of this is the 2016 ozone plan that we presented to your board last October. Our ozone plans are comprehensive documents that look at historical emissions as well as forecast future emission trends for our district. The emission trends that are present in the plan serve as the basis for helping us to identify solutions to improve air quality and predict the future effectiveness of control strategies and new rules. In addition to planning, our emission inventory is used to assess emission fees for stationary sources and to inform the public and community of nearby emissions. This next slide shows the district's permitted facilities map that we presented to your board last January, and is one of the tools that we've created to inform the public of where permitted stationary sources are located. The map includes links to facility permits and annual reports. Another way that helps to inform the public of emissions is CARB's newly created pollution mapping tool, which we provide emission data for and help CARB to review. About a year ago, AB 197 was passed, which created a mandate for CARB to make publicly available emissions of greenhouse gases and criteria pollutants from California's largest emitters. Specifically, facilities that are subject to the GHG mandatory reporting regulation were to have their emissions portrayed in an illustrative manner that would allow the public to view emission trends over time. CARB took this directive and created an interactive mapping tool with various mapping layers to evaluate the largest emitters around the state. AB 197 also directs CARB to add toxic pollutant data to this mapping tool, which they'll include by the end of this year. As you can see, CARB's mapping tool looks pretty similar to ours, except it only includes 14 facilities in Santa Barbara County. Throughout this presentation, Tim and I have given you a brief look into the steps that go into compiling the district's emission inventory. As with everything at the district, the emission inventory is a constantly evolving process that we are always working to improve. Recently, we've been working towards making our annual report forms simpler so that we can automate the process of collecting emissions data and help with our emission calculations. In addition, our job requires coordination with CARB, other air districts, as well as our permitted sources to maintain an up-to-date inventory that is thoroughly reviewed and vetted so that it can be used in planning and made available to the public. We've already seen through AB 197 and the pollution mapping tool that public access to air quality information and emission inventories is a huge priority of the states right now and will continue to be a focus with the recent passing of AB 617. There are many aspects of AB 617, and the main one of interest from an emission inventory perspective is CARB's mandate to develop a uniform statewide reporting system for large stationary sources. There are many details of this legislation that are still being ironed out, but as an air district, we will continue to work with CARB to navigate this evolving landscape and keep your board informed about the future of our emissions inventory. All right, thank you so much for your time, and at this time, we'd be happy to answer any of those 10 questions that you may have.
Go ahead.
Are you ready? Are you ready for this? Okay.
We're ready.
Yeah.
Number 1, subsection what?
I want to know why we don't have one slide in here that gives us a comparison of the preceding years with this year so we can tell how we're doing.
Why should we do that? So we don't, I mean, we do have the data to calculate.
Oh, I'm sure you do.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, but overall, we are seeing a decreasing trend in the emissions.
Right, well, it would be
for
nice
all of
to have that out here for all of us to understand so that when we're panicking because we're all going to die, then maybe we won't be so worried about it. Thank you.
I'd just remind my fellow director that we did just have a presentation on 2 or 3 of the criteria pollutants, including NOx, and the history of it just a couple meetings ago. So the staff is giving us that in slides, but just not all of them at once, as I understand it.
Well, I think when you do a presentation like this, it's reasonable to throw a couple slides in about how you're doing, because somebody, a member of the public, may run into this on TV at 2 o'clock in the morning and not understand it. You know, they may see this as a unique slice, and I think it's just responsible of us to throw that in, because we are doing way better than we were in the past, and so I think we should always say that.
That's a great idea, and we missed it on this opportunity. It's the first time we brought the emissions inventory to your board, so next year, guess what? Guaranteed it'll be there.
Yeah, and I will say, just adding on that, I know this isn't for all the facilities, but on the new pollution mapping tool that's available to the public, you can go in here and click on the largest emitting facilities in the county, and it goes all the way back to 2008 for a lot of them. So it's a pretty good tool for looking at some of the emission trends.
Dr. Levin,
a question. So, what's the relation to ROx and NOx? So, I mean, if you had one and not the other, because I'm looking at NOx and it's like you know, we've got stationary sources down to it's only 3% of the overall NOx emissions. We really can't do much about the rest of it. But I mean, how do those two interact? If you had ROx, no NOx, or NOx, no ROx?
It would be harder. Yeah. If you only had one, it would be harder to form ozone. There still are.
So they have to together form ozone.
And yeah, in a higher concentrations together, you can, you know, because it is complicated and it's not always going to be the exact same ratio at every point in the county. It depends on, you know, the ratio. And if you have way more NOx and not enough ROC, you might not get that much ozone on a certain day. But then if ROC goes back up, then ozone they'll be more creative for that specific day.
Okay.
And you may recall during our non-attainment transitional rule implementation schedule revisions, in that staff report, we put a lot of time and focus on the emphasis between NOx reduction versus ROC reduction. We conducted a weekend effect analysis, which was attached to the study. And even though it's relatively small as far as the total pie, 3%, that analysis showed even if we were to focus and put more of an emphasis on the NOx reductions, it would have a long-term benefit over the ROC. And that was the justification for our staff rule change in this non-attainment transitional phase to still continue focusing on NOx reductions.
Okay. So I just don't understand the science of it, that's all. So I'm just trying to figure that part out. So then one other question is on the PM. Are those the days that we go out of attainment on those? Is that basically windy day? I mean, I see in Santa Maria sometimes, like, you know, the days that I see are days where dirt's kicking up all over the place. And So
Yeah.
we don't really.
High wind and fugitive dust.
So do we get any, we were up here talking about, you know, you get these fires and all of a sudden we're out of attainment. Is there any act of God clause or, hey, sorry it was windy? I mean.
For the wildfires, they have an exceptional event opportunity for states, and it's predominantly used for attainment for the federal standard, and we meet the federal particulate matter and ozone standards, so that doesn't necessarily pertain to our county. The state has a similar process. It's just not used very regularly, but it is available, and we could try to make the case. But in addition to wildfires, there are measures or efforts that we could do to try to reduce the dust impacts. Just something that we do now, but it's something that we can consider in the future.
Well,
go ahead.
I just wanted to thank you guys. This inventory, it's really interesting to see where the rock and the PMs and everything come from. It was really, really interesting. Some of it we've got a lot of control over, and some of it not that much. But thank you very much for a good presentation.
Yeah, and back to the PMs, you know, I have a cattle place out by the coast, and it's got a vantage point where you're looking straight down the coast and into St. Louis County. And on really windy days, that the PM that's coming off of the beach and you know, as the water takes the sediment out to sea, and then it kind of comes back into the sand as the sand gets separated from the fines. And it's like the wall of opacity in the air starts at the beach. And if you're up in town, you can't see that, you know, or any place else, practically any place else in North County, you can't experience that effect of seeing that start at the beach. And you would think that it's just coming out of all the farm fields and stuff. And there is stuff coming out of the farm fields, no question about it, but it starts at the beach and then works its way east. And so, you know, back towards Supervisor Lavanino's point is we should probably be measuring that, and on those non-attainment days say, hey, look, you know, there's got to be some kind of a credit given for naturally occurring stuff. And I know we don't do that in some of the other stuff, but other measurements. But you know, that one right there is probably pretty well calculable because it's in it's really relatively concentrated spot.
You know, there's been a lot of analysis in Santa Barbara or San Luis Obispo County as it relates to their PM, and they have a very robust PM network. In our county, our PM stations in Santa Maria off of Betaravia and Cook, it's close to that intersection. So it's removed from where you're really seeing the higher levels. And this is something that I've been having in the back of my mind as a future analysis to get a better handle of what our levels are and what is coming from natural sources. And you know, you have the riverbed there as well. On dry days with a lot of high wind, you're going to get, if that river hasn't been flowing, you're going to get PM just being blown off the river. But that's just something long-term plan that I hope we can do some analysis and get a better handle and understanding on. We just aren't there right now as far as our resources.
Well, and you know, it would be impolitic to try to send Northern California a bill for our PM, but you know, we could talk about sending San Luis County a bill for their PM that comes over onto us, because most of that coastline that I'm looking at is San Luis County, so maybe they should take responsibility for some of our non-attainment.
The transition from one county to another.
Yeah.
In Santa Maria, any questions?
No.
Okay. I just had one question about natural occurring inventory of the pollutants. I mean, it was mentioned here, but one you'd mentioned earlier was salt in the air. I mean, how do you guys calculate that when you're doing your calculations of inventory, whether it's natural biodegradation or natural seepage in the channel or whatever it might be? I mean, are you're just using mathematical computations where people are buying and selling, or?
So for the, because you mentioned the seeps and so forth, so we have had some calculations from the last the last 5-10 years or so that did look at what the amount of ROC emitted into the atmosphere would be. And so, yes, that would be around, I think, 24 tons per day or so for the ROC inventory for just the seeps. And so that's just based off of some of those studies from the last 5 to 10 years. We don't actively change the numbers every single year, and so it's just kind of, but if new information comes up to the point of we can refine those numbers, we would do so at that point in time.
And how does that affect your monitoring stations when your anticipation, your calculations are all man-made, but you have potentially a huge natural occurring?
So we, a lot of the monitors, like for the ROC emissions, we are more measuring the ozone concentrations and so forth. And so that is NOx and ROC, and you're not going to specifically see if the ROC is coming from our own like vehicle exhaust or if it's coming from the seeps. It's all, you know, the ROC is intermingling in the atmosphere to create the ozone. Going on over to the PM side, you're talking about the, you know, sea salt analysis. That would be something where we could, I believe, take filter samples and look at how much of it is road dust, how much of it is sea salt. And the last studies done for that were around 5 to 10 years ago as well.
So it seems like a lot of these pie charts here are kind of maybe missing a disclaimer or a component in there saying that it can be skewed because of natural occurring inventories as well.
So a lot of these charts, yeah, well, this would be, all these calculations are for the planning inventory, the man-made calculations. So this wouldn't include anything specifically for the sea salt analysis.
Okay, so maybe along with historical data, if you put in some of the natural calculate, even if they're 4 or 5 years old, having some of the natural estimates, it's interesting to hear that the rock is 24 tons per day, so it's equivalent to what you're calculating all this to be man-made, right? So we're 1-to-1 natural versus man-made on that.
Yeah.
So maybe that would be good as well for those people at 2 o'clock in the morning watching this, right?
Right.
Another question?
Yeah. So these numbers, what I just heard you said, I'm still processing a little bit. Some of these things are 100% inventory. This is 100% like on the rock. You have 100% inventory of what you sampled here.
So you're kind of, this is the emission inventory, and it's not going to be specifically correlated to what is being monitored at the stations. So the inventory is on a tons per day method, where it's just looking at over the course of the entire, you know, on a regular day, how much ROC emissions is being emitted from every single source in the county. Whereas a monitor is picking up only the pollution in the nearby vicinity. And we have a whole bunch of different monitoring stations. So that's, you know, we have a robust network of around 12 or 13 different monitors. Each one will be recording different amounts of pollution in its area, but our inventory will still be the same for the entire county. So we haven't broken down the inventory into localized areas yet.
We use both the monitoring data that we gather out in the stations, that we have 16 monitors countywide that's gathering the data. We use all of that data and we combine it with the information that we get from the actual sources, our emissions inventory, and we use both of those to get a better picture of the air quality challenges that we have in our county, and then how best can we propose long-term planning plans, ozone plans, that then get us below the ambient air quality standards. So we use both of those. We combine them in our analysis, and then
Well,
we
I
pull
get
that back
that.
to you.
I get that, but
Okay.
how do you, I mean, when you take a sample, how do you extract the portion that's naturally occurring? Because if you're telling me that this is 100% man-made, but we know that we have naturally occurring.
The backup slide? bottom?
Yeah, you could, that would be good.
Okay, yeah, I think we'll go to one more slide. Okay.
There we go.
Okay, so we have on the left the planning inventory, and so that's all the different emissions that we went over, ROC, NOx, PM10, and PM2.5, and it also has the other two pollutants, SOx and carbon monoxide, which we attained those standards. So for the planning inventory is everything that's man-made, and that's from all the stationary sources we have permitted, all the area sources of the residential heaters and architectural paints, all the vehicle exhaust.
And you're extrapolating those. You're assuming
based on the best available knowledge for a lot of the models.
Okay.
So yeah. So that is the entire planning inventory. And then for some of the natural sources, we don't have reports from Mother Nature saying this is how much I emitted this year. So
right, but see, that's what confuses this thing is when you try and take a sample and then it's kind of inferred that it's out of the extrapolated data and therefore man-made, and it's not, because there's a component of naturally occurring in there as well.
yes, and as we are trying to attain, the PM10 state standard, some of that will be sea salt, which we do have no control over because we can't stop it. But there still is a portion of that that is from man-made sources, and to help us better understand where this pollution is coming from is why we have the emission inventory, to see what are the largest contributors in the county that could cause these exceedances being measured at monitoring stations.
Well, I think that makes it even more important that we go out and try and quantify some of these things like I was talking about up at Guadalupe Beach and stuff, where you really are yielding a lot of PM10 and probably 2.5 also, and that's a large component of what you're measuring downstream or upstream, I guess. And you need to know what portion those components are.
Mm-hmm.
Is that number 10? Question number 10?
All right. All right, thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
On to number 2. Read away.
Item number 2 is to receive a presentation from district staff on the district compliance program.
All right, our last item today.
Did I do public comment the last one?
No, you did
Forgot.
not. Yeah.
Any public comment? Sorry about that. It's okay, none. Guess they're supposed to catch me. I got 2 on the side here and they let me go by.
Caught yourself,
Can't
that's
believe
pretty
it.
good. All right, our last item today will be a presentation on the district's compliance program. This was originally requested by your board earlier this year when there was a discussion on an NOV report and questions related to the time frame for resolution of an NOV settlement. In addition to conducting inspections, issuing notices of violations, negotiating violation settlements, the Air District's Compliance Division is also responsible for complaint response, local burn program, asbestos demolition and renovation, participation in the county's System, Safety, and Reliability Review Committee, as well as managing our hearing board. Today, Ms. Caitlin McNally, our Compliance Division Manager, will provide a presentation on our agency's compliance program.
Thank you, Erin. Okay, thank you, Erin. Good afternoon, Chair Mosby and members of the board. As Erin said, my name is Caitlin McNally and I'm the manager of our compliance division. Today, I will be informing you about our district compliance program. Our compliance division consists of 5 inspectors. We have 2 in the South County and 3 in the North County. We also have 1 supervisor and then me. I'm here presenting to you today, as Erin mentioned, because of the questions that came up and the requests that came up in January. Before I jump into the slides, I'd like to give you a better idea about what I'll be presenting on today. So first, I'm going to describe what we do, our notice of violation process, our mutual settlement program, the accomplishments we've made in our division, and recent improvements we've made to the mutual settlement program. We also have recent state legislation that Alex and Tim mentioned, AB 617, that has some effects on the mutual settlement program as well. And then I'll talk about our next steps. In case you're curious, the picture on the screen is a picture of natural gas compressor stacks that we inspect. All right. Before I inform you about what we do, I first wanted to give you a background on what compliance is for the district. Compliance means conforming to a rule or regulation. And for a source regulated by the district, in order to comply, they need to know what they need to comply with, understand what that means, and take the steps to meet the regulatory requirements. So I'm going to talk today about how we help sources understand and comply, and then how we enforce our requirements. The goals of our program are to protect public health and the environment, treat sources fairly and equitably, educate sources and the public, which is in line with what I mentioned earlier, with our aim to help sources know about the requirements and understand the regulations that they need to comply with, and then motivate sources to comply so that they see the importance of taking the steps to comply with the requirements. And we are responsive to the public. We accomplish the goals that I just mentioned by performing inspections. One type of inspection we perform is an initial inspection when sources first begin operating. These inspections are very important because they are the time that inspectors help the sources understand the requirements, walk them through the permit, the rules they're subject to, and what they need to do to meet the requirements that we have for them. Then after the initial inspection is performed, our goal is to inspect most sources once a year, and there are sources with higher emissions that we inspect more frequently, either biannually or quarterly. We also have a lot of useful information on our inspections and our requirements on our webpage, including our inspection policy and procedures. So those are available to the sources and the public to view. The second part of what we do is review records like annual reports, which summarize the operations and the emissions for the last calendar year. And we take emission measurements in some cases. The picture on this screen is actually an inspector using sorry, I gotta find him. A handheld volatile organic compound monitor at a dry cleaner to measure for leaks from their equipment. We also respond to complaints. The way that we document non-compliance is the notice of violation. It's a document that we issue typically within a day or so of discovering a violation. However, we do have the ability to issue a violation up to 3 years after the discovery of the violation pursuant to the California Code of Civil Procedure. The NOV informs the source of the rule, regulation, or permit condition that was violated, and most importantly, it initiates the corrective action, which stops the violation and reduces air pollution. Each day of non-compliance is an additional count of violation. However, that doesn't mean we issue a separate violation for every day. We just take inventory of the number of days that they were out of violation. After an NOV is issued and compliance is achieved, it's processed in our mutual settlement program. The goal of the program is to negotiate a resolution directly with the source. A mutual settlement agreement is between the Air Pollution Control Officer and the NOV recipient. And it's a negotiated agreement outside of the purview of your board. These agreements typically include monetary penalties, and the goals of the agreement are to create a level playing field for our sources and deter future violations. Monetary penalties that I just mentioned are assessed in the mutual settlement agreements on a case-by-case basis. The 9 criteria on the screen are used to to determine the penalty and are based on health and safety code requirements. These are also documented in our mutual settlement policy and procedure, which is available on our website as well. In addition to a monetary penalty, larger NOVs may be settled with a voluntary agreement to fund a supplemental environmental project. Those are environmentally beneficial projects that go above and beyond the requirements that the source needs to meet to comply with our requirements, and they should be related to the violation that occurred. And lastly, if the NOV can't be settled directly with the source and the district, it may be referred to the Santa Barbara County District Attorney's Office. So now that you know a bit more about our compliance program, I'd like to inform you of our accomplishments. From January 1st, 2015 through September 29th, 2017, Compliance Division staff performed 2,029 facility inspections and averaged 61 facility inspections per month. Our division also issued 422 NOVs, which is an average of 13 NOVs per month. In this photo, our inspectors are measuring for leaks from a flare scrubber at an oil and gas facility. In our mutual settlement program from January 1st, 2015 through September 29th, 2017, 54% of the NOVs that we issued were complied with, settled, and the penalties were paid, so they're closed out. We have 15% of the violations where the settlement has been initiated by the district, but it's not yet finalized. And then we have 31% of the violations issued where settlement has not yet been initiated. There is an average of 177 days between the violation issuance and when settlement was initiated by the district. And then there's also an average of 51 days between when the settlement was initiated by the district and the penalty payment was received. Yeah. So looking at those numbers, it's clear that there's room for improvement in our mutual settlement program. So we decided to make changes to the program with the following goals. Oops, sorry, I didn't. Okay. We wanted more timely settlement of NOVs, initiating the settlement process closer to when we issue the violation. Which will result in better settlement negotiation outcomes. We also wanted to increase inspector efficiency and avoid settling NOVs before compliance is achieved. So how we are accomplishing those goals is making improvements to the program. We assigned an advanced journey level inspector to the program recently. And in order to settle NOVs in a more timely manner that I mentioned in the last slide, we established a new performance metric with the goal to send 50% of initial mutual settlement letters within 90 days of the NOV issuance. This was incorporated in our current budget document and will be tracked for this fiscal year. This also would be a really good improvement from our current average of 177 days between initial settlement and NOV issuance that I mentioned in the last slide. In order to improve the outcomes of our settlements, we revised our mutual settlement agreement templates to create more robust and defensible agreements. And in order to increase inspector efficiency, we implemented paperless internal mutual settlement filing process and system so that we don't have to spend as much time with the paperwork. And lastly, we now only refer NOVs to the mutual settlement program after compliance is achieved. During the recent development and implementation of these changes, we did experience a decrease in productivity in our accomplishments for the program. So that's part of what contributed to the low numbers you saw on the last slide. However, and that was due to the time spent in training the inspector, revising the templates, and implementing the paperless filing system. But now that these improvements are implemented, we expect them to help us meet our goals. As Tim and Alex mentioned, in July of this year, Assembly Bill 617 was enacted by the legislature and the governor, And this legislation relates to criteria air pollutants from stationary sources and had implications for our compliance program as well as the inventory program. Specifically, it increased the maximum civil penalties for our violations from $1,000 to $5,000 for each day the violation occurs. In addition, it requires the maximum penalties to be increased annually based on the California Consumer Price Index. We are now focusing on implementing these changes in our program. So as I described, we have begun implementing changes to improve our mutual settlement program, but there's still work to do. We are working to meet the new mutual settlement performance metric that I mentioned earlier. We plan to continue working in-house to identify and implement improvements to our program. And as I just mentioned, we're working on implementing the new legislation that recently passed. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Director Levin? No?
I have two questions. The first has to do with, could you describe to me what happens internally between the issuance of the NOV and then the compliance letter, the 177, and now the 3 months? What happens that you need that period of time? My second question, I'll just get it out here. Do we see technological changes for real-time monitoring that would lessen the burden on inspectors? And what do we expect over time to see in terms of technology?
Sure. Good questions. So to answer, I'm going to answer your first question, and then I actually would like a little clarification on your second, but I'll answer your first question first. So when we issue a violation, sometimes the action that needs to be taken in response to the violation to come back into compliance is simple and quick. The source is required to respond within a certain amount of time. Normally it's around 10 days about what corrective action they took and whether or not they're back in compliance. That, those violations can be processed pretty quickly in the mutual settlement program because compliance is achieved quickly. There are other situations where compliance is more complicated, and we work with the source as much as possible to identify and implement changes to comply with the requirements. And so sometimes that can take an extended amount of time, either because of the amount of work and time that needs to go into complying, or sometimes, the source is not very responsive in taking timely action. So that's the biggest thing that adds time to being able to process the settlement offers quickly. And besides that, in the past, different priorities and workload have affected our ability to process the mutual settlement offers in a timely manner. It was just a matter of getting to it. And so that's why we really wanted to get somebody who is focused on the program and could give it the time that it deserves with that new advanced journey level inspector. Does that answer your first question? Okay, and then for the second question, what type of monitoring do you mean?
I know a company in Goleta, for example, that does monitoring, air quality monitoring equipment, and they can put the sensors out there and they're watching on their computer real-time data. And so I just wonder where we are. We had a previous meeting where we learned about transportation technologies on the horizon. And so what I'm asking is, what kinds of monitoring technologies for stationary sources do we have on the horizon? And would that change the workload and how you assign staff at APCD?
Do you want me to answer that, or do you? We can do, yeah. So we do have certain sources that have equipment that have higher emission levels are required to do continuous emission monitoring. And they monitor in-stack emissions real time and send the data back to us, to our data acquisition system. And we're able to track that data and take any actions as we're seeing emissions possibly going over the requirements. That is limited to higher emission sources. So we don't necessarily have real-time monitoring associated with smaller sources. However, all sources have a monitoring condition in their permit, but a lot of it is more manual type monitoring where they have to, identify when they take measurements or do calibrations of their measuring equipment. Does that address? I mean, we're always, open to new technologies and incorporating whatever makes sense, but I don't have a specific thing that I'm aware of on the horizon. Does that answer?
I think it's real important, too, the role that our inspectors play, going out in the field and working with all of the specific sources that are under Air District rule and regulation to be a link to provide education and see how they're operating, get a better feel for how their operations are, so then we can determine if what we have in place with our permit condition actually works for them as well. So it's a really nice opportunity to get out there and do some ombudsman type work where we're able to actually have that human face with all the sources that we regulate.
Good. That's all right.
Thank you. So I want to go to the slide about mutual settlement accomplishments where it goes through the percentages.
Yes.
Okay, so help me understand, on the 31% over those 2 years, almost 3 years, so we don't have a settlement initiated yet, so what does that mean? That we haven't come to an agreement? Or
so
we haven't started it?
We haven't started the process. So what that means is the violation has been issued. Some of them may be complied with. Some of them there might not even be compliance achieved yet if it's, a complicated situation. And we have not even sent it to the mutual settlement officer.
So run through a scenario for me where we would issue a notice of violation.
Hypothetical.
Yeah, hypothetical. Who is this? I mean, that's disturbing that there's an NOV, it hasn't been addressed, they might still be out of compliance. So is the clock ticking on the fine at that point? Okay.
Yes, so the longer that a source is out of compliance, the higher potential penalties associated with it, because as I mentioned in an earlier slide, each day of violation is a separate violation and counted when determining the penalty. And so, it ranges. Some may be record keeping and reporting requirements that they're not meeting. Like I mentioned earlier, we have an annual report that's due. Some sources don't submit that. We issue a violation, they don't pay attention to it, and it can be hard for them to get that report into us. So each day that it's late is counted as a separate violation.
So for me, I guess and I don't know what the other board members feel, but I feel like I would like to know, like if we have almost like I don't know how you keep track of these by date, but if there's some that have gone on for 6 months or a year and a half, I think I would like to know, who those folks are, so that they might be coming to us for other permits or other action, and it would be nice to go through and cure some of the existing items. And then who negotiates? Do we have somebody on staff, or how does that happen? How do we get into a negotiation settlement?
The inspector that is newly assigned is the negotiator, and they have oversight from their supervisor and myself as necessary.
Okay.
And for your first question, I'm open to bringing back to your board more information. I would like a chance for our improvements to be implemented in time to pass, so that we can see how that affects that list of what you're interested in before presenting back to your board.
I know we get the list of who violated and then who was fined, and a third of another one of those would be nice to see, like, violations over 6 months or over 1 year or something like that, so that we have concept of, I had no idea we had people out there 3 years with an NOV, and we don't have anything established yet, so it's interesting. Thank you.
Mr. Chair and board members, there would be some sensitivity if there's an ongoing enforcement case, to bring it in here and sort of air it out. That I don't know if that's...
But an NOV it's not public record?
It is a public record, but if the staff is in negotiations, or if there's an ongoing violation...
well, then maybe we don't. Okay. So it'd be nice to know what the scope of the problem is then. So I guess if we just had something that just said, hey, we have 7 of them that are over 2 years old, and it would be nice to know. I'd really like to know who it is, but I guess we see those on the fines anyway, so.
Thank you for your report. I'm curious how we verify compliance.
So it depends on the type of violation. If it's a reporting violation or records violation, we would request, a copy of the record that was not previously complied with. If it's a physical violation with emissions, we would go out to the source and perform an inspection to verify that compliance has been achieved.
We had a case in my town, Carpinteria, where the oil and gas plant was #1 on the hot spots report.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if we still do that kind of thing or what that was really called, but if that's the real name for it. But anyway,
Yeah.
So there was like this, benzene plume over the plant, and it was lapping over into the neighborhood, and so the neighbors complained because they saw this in the hotspots report, and so you guys came out and recommended the stack be raised 10 feet, but then I don't think you ever came back out, but the operator kept sending in records that yes, they had complied with that when the neighbors noticed that they hadn't, and so the neighbors finally, after a while, were able to bring this to a head, and you guys came back out and they actually did raise the stack up, but I want to make sure that stuff like that we just we verify that it actually occurs.
Yes, that is our goal, and I apologize if
Thanks.
that was an issue.
Director Williams.
Well, I guess that the length of some of these makes you wonder. Are some folks just paying the fine as a cost of doing business, and because correcting the action would be more expensive than paying the fine?
Well, we require the action to be corrected. We've had some oversights in the past where the fine has been paid and the corrective action not taken. But in those cases, we issue another violation and go through the process again. We don't, if it can be corrected moving forward, we make every effort to work with the source to require that. And the other part of deterring that, just cost of doing business is as the same violations occur, the penalties increase, and that is specified in the Health and Safety Code. So if you have a recurring violation, then your penalties are going to be going up. So that helps deter that cost of business.
And then to Mr. Lavanino's point, it seems to me that maybe at least you should bring us the, especially because it's a matter of public record, those that are not responding to your overtures or in which negotiation has gone unreasonably long, because I think there's some value that you might consider to having a high flyers club, and it definitely is something that the public might have a right to know, and it's something that we might want to have a right to know. So, I'm not wanting us to have a conclusion on it, but I just think there might be some cases in which that it would be valuable to bring some of those to us.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, the concern would still be having a public hearing on an outstanding case, because there is a process for hearings. If they don't settle it with the control officer, and they normally do, they normally work these things out, it's usually then referred to the district attorney. We hesitate to make an additional public forum available. If they're out of compliance and they need a variance for some good reason, they can always go to the hearing board, and that's a public process, publicly noticed, and the hearing board has to make very specific findings right out of the statute. But it's just important to realize or remember that this board has a legislative function, and your executive officer is the one with the enforcement function, and that's not shared with the board. It's the executive officer who has that duty under the statute. So you know, they've always had general reports on these issues, but over the years, there's been a lot of, you know, care taken to not sort of mix those two together, because it could really get away from us if we end up with, you know, some people might start demanding hearings in front of the board to take the executive officer, you know, out of the picture or pull that person back. It could work both ways. And so really the enforcement program at APCD is, in my opinion, it's very good. They have the most inspectors of any agency in the county. Often I think the fire department feeds off of the APCD in terms of what's going on out in the field. I think environmental health also does the same on occasions. So it's a good program. You know, oversight's important, but you know, we really, I advise against you know, letting people who are in violation to somehow seek hearings in front of this board. It's a two-way street, and it's just better to let the process run, is my opinion. Thank you.
Does that answer that question? Director Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I want to thank our executive director and also Brittany for bringing this forward. It's an obvious internal process improvement that I'm really glad that you brought to our attention, and you're taking care of it. You know, this form that we get, the notice of violation report, I remember when I first came on APCD, it was something that I had requested, and I look at it, you know, I'm sure we all do. We look at this, but one thing that caught me this month is the fact that there was we have no penalties received this month, and so it caught my attention why that was the case, but I didn't bring it up when I guess I could have. But my point as it relates to what we're talking about is that it is really disturbing to see these the number of cases, the percentage of cases that lapse and are unresolved. So again, I think the fact that you have identified this problem and have come to us and telling us how you're going to resolve it is really a good thing. So thank you for that. And I think to the questions that my colleagues have raised, which I agree with, about, you know, how do we know about it? The time delay, I think that the form that we do have, where it does say when a violation is issued and then the date that it's paid, does give us an indication of the time, either it's paid immediately or there is a time delay. And now that we have a better understanding, because frankly, I didn't realize that there was a settlement process that went on. So this conversation today has really helped me understand even a little bit better these forms that we have. So I think what we have here is really informative. So I want to thank you for bringing this to our attention and identifying this problem. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So I guess it sounds like the answer's already out here. You just extrapolate your own paperwork, right?
But I think we could characterize in general sense those entities in a gross number that are beyond a year or 6 months, just to give the board some idea of the issues, the challenges that we're facing.
Well, let me, if I could, Mr. Chair, and maybe this is a question for Mr. Dillon, since we have an enforcement policy, I suspect, in place, why would they go that long? It would seem that if you can't reach a negotiated settlement, that what's the next step?
As Caitlin mentioned in her presentation, you know, we work through trying to settle everything in-house, going through negotiations, and if we exhaust all of our opportunities, whether it's through the mutual settlement program or through our hearing board, then we have the opportunity to work with the county district attorney's office.
So at what point is that? What is it? Is it a month? I mean, 6 months that you referred to the DA?
Yeah, it really just depends on the case and the complexity of the case. They have a long time between when the violation originally occurs versus when they bring that into compliance, that process into compliance. And then we go through the negotiation as far as the penalty associated with that. And then we make a decision. So it really is a case-by-case situation.
So then, I don't know how it would be fair to say, you know, because every case is different then, to bring us a list of everyone who hasn't complied within 6 months, because every case is different.
Perhaps what we could do is we could list all of the, well, we have all the NOVs that are issued. We can, just as Caitlin was summarizing in her presentation, how many of those cases have, the violations have come into compliance, and then how many have been in compliance, but we still have not been able to reach settlement agreement yet, just to give a flavor.
I think that's a really good thing. I mean, it's kind of implied in the information that we would have in front of us, but still to have another column that says that, that's a good thing too.
Okay.
One quick question. Do you guys issue NOVs for PM releases?
Well, if it's a permit condition, yes, or a rule and regulation.
Rule of regulation?
Rule and
for their operation or for?
Yeah, based on the district's rule book.
I mean, as you mentioned, I know it's part of the previous presentation, but you know, agricultural is potentially part of the PM with dirt or material like that. Is that something that you guys would?
Potentially, if it was causing a public nuisance for ag, dust is subject. No. What?
I think for dust, for like track out onto the road.
But just asking, I mean, because I'm reading the reports, I don't seem to see any, but it was part of the calculation up there from before, so I was wondering if that, anyhow, I'm just wondering. All right, any questions, Santa Maria?
None from me.
Okay, any public comment? Any more questions? One more time. All right. We'll consider that received, and then we'll adjourn. Are we good up here, staff? Okay, we'll adjourn until Thursday, December 21st in Santa Barbara at 1 p.m.